Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
I'm reeling a bit from the last hour. I think it's almost refreshing. It's probably career suicide. I have to bear that in mind all the time. But it's incredibly refreshing to, having spent a significant number of years thinking I've got a strong opinion on every subject under the sun, I quite enjoy not having one. I mean, this is what thinking feels like, isn't it? I don't know what's right and what's wrong in this context, but we had some amazing calls there, culminating in a conversation about a tattoo artist, although that may be an unfair description or an inaccurate description. Either way, he has dubbed himself Dr. Evil, and he has admitted seriously wounding 3 customers by carrying out tongue-splitting and ear and nipple removals, and we concluded the hour by speaking to the man who was actually the recipient of the nipple removal procedure. That's not a phrase you hear every day on LBC, or indeed anywhere else, except perhaps in Dr. Evil's world. But I'd like to move on to something similar, if I may, and not similar in any obvious sense, but similar in the sense of not knowing quite what to think about it. When did you first get frightened of Facebook? You may not be frightened of Facebook already. You may still not be frightened of Facebook. I'm not frightened of Facebook, but I have my Facebook page set up in such a way that I only see stuff effectively that I want to see, if you see what I mean. It's not a public page. So there was no way that my feed could have been bombarded with racist propaganda in the run-up to the Brexit referendum vote, or there's nothing that had flagged me up as being... I've told you before, all I get is trampoline adverts. I bought a trampoline 2 years ago, and the Facebook algorithms don't seem to have moved on from that. All I get is trampoline adverts. I've got a flipping trampoline. How many trampolines can one family realistically hold? So then the Cambridge Analytica stuff came out, and there's still mysteries. There's a great piece in The Guardian today by George Monbiot that actually points out on both sides of the continuing Brexit brouhaha, there are now organisations funding Facebook adverts without necessarily being completely transparent about where their money is coming from. One outfit that's punting WTO terms, which, as we all know, is nothing like what the cheerleaders claim it is, spent 150 grand and no one knows where the money has come from. I mentioned it to you earlier in the week. But that doesn't constitute enough for me to log off Facebook yet, weirdly. Perhaps weirdly, perhaps counterintuitively, I don't know. And then I mentioned to you before Christmas that we were thinking of getting one of those devices. I won't say the name of it because everyone who's got a device, it'll suddenly come on and start doing weird things in your kitchen. But when you have a smart device in your home that can play music or operate things, and you say the name, let's call it Andy. So you've got a device in your house and you go, Andy, turn on the light. Andy, play me LBC. Andy, make me a toasted sandwich. All right, can't quite do that yet, but you know what I'm talking about. Begins with A. And I mentioned to you before Christmas that I was thinking of getting one for one of my girls, and she loves the idea of being able to turn on stuff in her bedroom without getting out of bed. And I thought that was one of the least controversial things I'd ever said to you. Do you know, there's one thing from my past on social media that really did shock me in terms of the response that you get. I've just remembered what was even more surprising than the response I got when I said I was thinking of getting one of those devices. Shortly after Grenfell, I can't remember whether I've ever told you this, but I was thinking about it the other day for something that popped up in an interview. Shortly after the Grenfell Tower tragedy, I tweeted what I thought was a very, very casual and important comment about don't go out and riot, don't go out and commit crimes tonight. I know how angry everybody is, but getting arrested is not going to bring anybody back, fix anything, or bring anything but a whole heap of trouble down upon your family. I would have said that was among the least controversial things I've ever tweeted. And my God, I got coated for it, absolutely coated. I'm still not entirely sure why. I think the contention was that, you know, how dare you, from the outside looking in, tell us how to behave? And that's a reasonable criticism, but it wouldn't account for the tone or indeed the quantity of astonishing abuse that came in. So I'm just putting that out there as another example of something when you say something or you throw something out into the social media ether that you don't think is remotely controversial. So I said, I'm thinking of getting one of my girls this thing for Christmas. And some of the responses were incredibly Anglo-Saxon. You effing idiot. Why don't you just give them all the access to your bank account? I'd never have that in my house. Someone I like, someone I know really well, actually. I bumped into on Boxing Day. I was walking the dock down by the river and I said, what do you get your kids for Christmas? What do you do for this, for that? And before I told him what I'd got my kids for Christmas, he went off on one about how he'd never have one of these devices in his house, and one of his kids' friends had got one and he thinks they're disgrace. And I kind of thought, oops. I told him we got her a rocking horse. So the point is, today's report tells us that Google and Amazon are now requiring the makers of smart home devices to provide them with round-the-clock data on users' domestic activities. So this is being filed under privacy concerns. And you know that one of the biggest reverse ferrets I've undertaken in recent years involves that old phrase, if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. I used to be a lot more comfortable with the idea of government having powers of surveillance and authority until Donald Trump got elected in America. And then I realised we could end up with fascists in charge here, and God knows what they would do. A BBC journalist got beaten up at a Donald Trump rally the other day. Donald Trump, of course, describes the media as the enemies of the people. So it's not that surprising when one of his fans takes a swing at a BBC cameraman. So I'm no longer comfortable with government surveillance, precisely because I don't know what government's going to be in charge next year. I can't, and this is a failing on my part, I think, I can't muster up similar levels of suspicion and cynicism about Google and Amazon, which is insane, because, you know, Google and Amazon are run by incredibly rich people who certainly in the case of Amazon, don't seem to be that interested in anything other than their business. You know, Jeff Bezos managing to cast himself as some sort of hero in the context of his battles with the National Enquirer and Donald Trump. But it's important to remember that there are staff in Amazon warehouses so frightened of taking a break that they wee in bottles. And yet I'm not worried about this. So previously, if you told Andy or the Google Assistant to turn on your light within range of a smart speaker, I'd never even thought about this before. If you can say, Andy, turn on my bedroom light, that means that in some sense, Andy is listening to you all the time. No? My friend Ivan, who is the studio producer on the programme, he knows a lot about technology. So I generally gauge how idiotic I'm being in conversations like this by watching Ivan's face very closely. And I'm happy to report at the moment he's not looking either disgusted or amused by my ignorance. He's kind of supportive of my general position. Can we turn the lights up in there, actually? Can we get a spotlight on Ivan's face? So that means that in some sense, if you've got a smart speaker in your house, in some sense, it's listening to you all the time. At which point another one of my colleagues starts nodding furiously as this is evidence of the end of civilization as we know it. The Borg. The Borg is taking over. Previously, and this even, I mean, good Lord, how fast the world has turned in the last 40 years. So previously, if I said, Andy, turn on my fish tank, right? The manufacturer of the plug in the wall, or the manufacturer of the light, or the fish tank, whatever it is that is the smart device, the device would contact the manufacturer of the light, would contact their servers to ask for the bulb's status. Mate, you've got this in your sitting room in Stoke Newington. It's just nuts. Sorry, serious voice. Once it was confirmed that the bulb was off, then the speaker would instruct it to turn on. But the information has gone via the servers that are owned by the manufacturers of the smart light bulb. Yeah? Am I still... Just let me check Ivan's face. I'm still all right on this? Yeah? Now, industry sources have told Bloomberg that Amazon and Google were recommending, and I think more importantly, in some cases requiring, that smart home companies continuously report the status of devices connected to their hubs. That means that the so-called tech giants, of whom we are being warned to be increasingly suspicious, the tech giants could know whenever lights were on in specific rooms or if a front door was unlocked, regardless of whether the voice control option was used. And a little bit of me, that obviously if it got hacked and it was used by criminals, that would be bad, but it's not a reason to be suspicious of Google and Amazon yet, is it? Experts have said that this data could give the companies greater insight into people's habits and routines. And again, I kind of find myself thinking, well, that's great. Because, what if I really wanted a trampoline and the algorithms kept popping trampolines into my feed? It'd be really good. So the idea here is that they'd look at my habits and routines, working hours, children's bedtimes, and then use that information to target advertising at me. For example, if I was a sleep-deprived new parent, they could harvest this information from my speakers and use it to send me adverts for, really comfy pillows or something. And I might want a really comfy pillow. They couldn't really use it for political advertising because all they're working out is when things... Stop nodding at me like a conspiracy theorist. Political advertising would involve hearing what I'm saying in my sitting room. Like, I can't stand that Nigel Farage. So then they send you adverts for, decency and Christianity, civilization, those sort of things. So no, just by watching what's on and what's off, they're not going to find out about my political opinions, you prune. They're just going to find out about what's on and what's off. So what's wrong with that? Because it could be really useful. This guy, he cooks a lot of food at 2 o'clock in the morning. Let's send him some special offers for frozen pizzas. That kind of thing, no? But then in the back of my mind, there is that voice going, hang on a minute, mate. Big Brother's the baddie in 1984. You might need to reread it. And then, of course, you're worried about what they might be listening to. Is that a thing? I don't even know. Is that a thing? Why is that not a thing? I've got a speaker in my bedroom. Your thoughts after this?
Today, I'm really excited to have Cory Doctorow on the podcast. Cory is a true man of too many talents. He is a fiction writer and non-fiction writer. He is both one of the people who have shaped the internet from an early moment as one of the proponents of a Creative Commons license, and somebody who has for a good number of years been sounding the alarm bell for some of the ways in which the internet may turn into a much more dangerous force. What are the fears that do keep you awake at night? What are the fears do you think we should take seriously?
So I fear the traditional ills of surveillance, right? So that would be things like being able to identify and neutralize political threats before they could participate in discourse and create mass movements. I often think of Ed Snowden's point that in our lifetimes, a bunch of things that we think of as normal and right were unlawful, whether that's, smoking marijuana or being married to someone of the same gender as you. And the way that we got to these reforms where people are allowed to do normal and good things was not by forcing everybody to disclose all of the facts of their life immediately. It's by letting people have a private life where they can talk about their choices and their secrets in a manner and time of their choosing in order to recruit allies who become part of a mass movement.
So I'm trying to understand this claim because obviously at the time when there was no same-sex marriage in this country and at the time when pot was illegal, as it still is in certain ways, people always had the right to advocate for those things to be changed, right?
Yeah.
So we had the idea of freedom of speech, and that made it possible for people to say, hey, this is a really unjust law. But I guess you're saying that if people didn't know any gay people, if there were no people who could live a homosexuality openly and make others more comfortable with that idea, make them understand what it is to be homosexual, then the greater acceptability of this would never have percolated. I'm trying to understand the nature of a claim.
Not quite. No, it's more like, if I am gay and I hope that you, my father, my son, my loved one, will join me in advocating for my cause, there is a time and a place where I can tell you about this secret about myself, where I can come out to you, that will maximize the chance that you and I will form an alliance. And the best situated person to know when to disclose that fact about their life is the person whose fact it is. And the non-consensual disclosure of the socially unacceptable secrets of your life has the opposite effect in many cases. Rather than recruiting people who don't share your secret and who are not vulnerable to retaliation to act as your ally, instead it turns them against you, right? Because you can't frame the discussion in the way that makes sense. Whether that's something as simple as like, When your dad and you go away on a fishing trip and things are mellow and you sit down, you talk about it, and you got a couple of days together away from civilization to figure it out, then you may have a chance of bringing your dad in as your ally, as opposed to, like, for example, your dad and you having that argument at the Christmas table while your grandmother is there telling him that he's raised a pervert. And what did he do wrong?
Right.
It's just obvious that the space to choose the time and manner of the disclosure of the facts of your life is very important, and that the non-consensual disclosure of those facts leads to atomization and undermines the cause of human liberation.
And what's the non-consensual disclosure of those facts in this metaphor? Is it just people calling you out for stuff on Twitter and Facebook? Is it a state surveillance mechanism which would make law enforcement much better able to know that you're smoking pot, for example? How are you thinking about technology changing this background equilibrium in such a way that you can no longer determine the time and the mode of your disclosure?
So on the one hand, you can totally see this with states, and states particularly in their relationship with Facebook, because Facebook has this real names policy that punishes people who use the service to communicate with others without disclosing an identity that's traceable to them. And so the Facebook real names policy has outed a bunch of people who are trans. It's outed a bunch of people who are gay. It's outed a bunch of people who are sex workers. Then you could look at things like the militia checkpoints in Egypt and Syria, where people were pulled over and forced to log into Facebook so that militias could see who their friends were and then either execute them or let them go, right? So all of that and more is there, but also, commercial disclosures. So whether that's Facebook identifying you and marketing to you as a sex worker or as a gay person, and that inadvertently outing you to your family or your employer, or things like the ransom businesses, you have these mugshots websites that try to game your mugshot of your traffic stop or your DUI or whatever into the highest rank for you, and then charge you $500 to remove your name. So all of these and more are the ways that this can go wrong. And that's just on the terms of the social progress. And then the other things are things like stalkerware, where we have increased use of this by vengeful spouses and other abusers who put software on phones of their victims and use it to totally control their life. We have grifters and criminals using it in lots of ways. So, you can see this in the phenomenon of ratting, the remote access Trojans, where people put software on your computer that allows them to covertly operate your webcam. They capture things like incidental nudity, and then they blackmail you into either performing sex acts or into giving them cash on penalty of that material being released to your social media. And of course, when they take control of your computer, they also hijack your social media passwords. And then the whole spectrum of things that Shoshana Zuboff calls surveillance capitalism, and the use of surveillance to not manipulate you into doing things that you wouldn't otherwise do, but to put the thumb on the scales for, say, one vendor. So Amazon can use surveillance of its platform to figure out how to steer you from a product that you might prefer to a lower quality product that it surfaces in its search results that it gets a bigger kickback from. Google has just been punished for this by the European Union with some stonkingly big fines. And so, there's this whole range of surveillance problems, and we're still in surveillance. There's a whole other domain, which is control. But
yeah, I was just going to say, this is giving me plenty of nightmares for tonight. Thank you very much. Is that it, or is there a big set of other things? And from what you just said, it sounds like you also think there's a sort of completely separate realm of risks and fears around what you call control. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, and so I would say that this is not completely separate. I would say that control, inequality, and surveillance are intimately related to one another in every possible way. But control is the design of technologies to control their users rather than to be controlled by their users. So an example of that might be your phone is designed to only allow you to install software from the Apple App Store and not from a third-party app store. And Apple will give all kinds of arguments about why they should be allowed to do this, but it's impossible to ignore the fact that Apple also gets 30% of the money that changes hands when you buy software and when you spend money using that software by dint of operating this non-consensual two-sided marketplace. This spreads out into things like spare parts, where the parts for your car engine increasingly use chips that allow them to detect whether they've been installed by first-party mechanics or third-party mechanics, or whether they're first-party parts or third-party parts, and to refuse to work. So these are not parts that can't work, they're parts that won't work when they're in your device. John Deere very famously does this with its tractors. And, this starts to play into surveillance. So, for example, you can't choose to install third-party apps on your iPhone, which means that when the Chinese government orders Apple to block all VPNs that it can't spy on, then you can't install a VPN that hasn't been approved by Apple, which means you can't install a non-surveilling VPN.
That's interesting, because I was just going to ask, a lot of what you were just talking about sounds like a concern that I would usually frame around monopoly and perhaps monopsony and the sort of economic impact of that, which of course is important and serious. But I guess you're adding this extra element, which is that it does mean that if you then get control of the one master system, it becomes incredibly hard to circumvent. And that poses a risk of the concentration of political power, which goes beyond the risk of a concentration of economic power implicit in this sort of current debate around monopoly and monopsony.
Oh, it's even worse than that. Yes, it's monopolistic. It concentrates power, concentrates political power. It ties into authoritarian systems of control. So, for example, imagine backdooring equipment with complicity from the manufacturer, and now states can operate surveillance meshes that include your thermostat and the voting machine you used and your car and everything else. And we already see that with things like stingrays and IMC eye catchers that monitor signals from your cell phone to track you non-consensually as you move through time and space. And then add to all of that, that if you want to design a device that a user can't reconfigure, a device that treats its user as its adversary, you necessarily must obfuscate that device's functioning, and you must use both legal and technical tools to prevent people from disclosing how it works. So in other words, if you want to install third-party software on your phone, and your phone says, "I can't let you do that, Dave," and there's an icon on your phone's home screen labeled HAL 9000, but you can disable "I can't let you do that, Dave" by dragging the HAL 9000 icon into the trash, you will. And so the only way that this software can work is by acting as though it's malicious software. And malicious software goes to enormous pains to hide itself from your computer's process monitor, to hide itself from your computer's file manager. If you go and list out your files, you can't find the file that corresponds to the malicious software. If you list out your processes, it hides those. And increasingly, our devices are built in this way to have processes that run that are by design not monitorable or terminatable by the owner of the device, which means that anyone who's malicious, right? So now we're like leaving aside governments who are working in concert with manufacturers, or manufacturers who don't have your best interests at heart, but just petty grifters who figure out how to subvert that mechanism now have a means of running software on devices that you may be putting your body into, because your car is a computer you put your body into, or you may be putting inside your body, like an artificial pancreas, a continuous glucose monitor and an insulin pump, that by design, you can't even see that that software is running. And if you know it's running, you can't terminate it. And it gets worse than that, because the laws that protect this stuff, notably the Digital Millennium Copyright Act of 1998, which is like meant to prevent you from modifying your DVD player to make it region free, are so broadly written that they hold out criminal penalties of 5-year prison sentences and a $500,000 fine for a first offense for people who publish defects in systems that protect copyrights. And so now you have unauditable attack surfaces in every device that is seeking to monopolize a market, which is increasingly every device. And those unauditable attack surfaces, the defects in them can't be disclosed to you until they're so widely exploited that no one even bothers to deny them anymore. And so it's only once you've been totally compromised that you get to know that your thermostat is spying on you, or that your car can be remotely driven over the internet as 1.25 million Jeeps had to be recalled over, or any of the other hosts of horribles that should be science fiction and aren't, that these devices designed to treat you as their adversary can get up to when they're under the power of someone else.
So I got to tell you that unfortunately I find your list of potential hopes about the internet to be interesting and compelling, but much less convincing than this very vivid and rather long list of serious dangers from it. And what you've just been saying, I think, tracks with some of the things in the everyday discourse about the potential dangers of digital technology that I and probably most listeners to this podcast are aware of. But there's also a real novelty to how you're thinking about that, which makes me take this even more seriously. So I'm now scared into action. And I want to think, how do we deal with some of those dangers? How do we counteract those risks? How do we make sure that the internet is not going to be used to those terrible purposes? And I don't really know how to start. I know you've been thinking a lot about a new initiative in Europe to try and regulate some of this stuff in the most ambitious way so far. Tell us, first of all, what is the lay of the land? I mean, are there good initiatives? Can states actually govern this at all? How should we start to think about containing these risks through political action?
So one of the great theorists of this stuff is a lawyer and activist named Lawrence Lessig. And Lessig identifies these four forces that he says operate on society. There's code, which is like what technology can do. There's law, what's lawful. There's markets, what's profitable. And there's norms, what's socially acceptable. And what I find very useful about this framework is that rather than saying, to solve our problem, we do this, instead what it gives us is a set of heuristics that we can deploy when we come to an impasse. So right now, the lay of the land is very bad, right? We are in a situation where big tech companies lobby like crazy to maintain these, and they have found constituencies not just in the tech sector, but in every sector. So, we talk about tech and entertainment, for example, as often being in opposition, and sometimes they do butt heads in policy forums. But by and large, the tech sector would like these proprietary technologies to lock people into their ecosystem in the same way that the entertainment sector would like proprietary technologies to make sure that when, your DVDs are sunsetted and you buy a new device, that you can't just transfer the movies you bought on DVD into that new ecosystem and make you buy them all again, the way you did when you had to, replace your cassettes with CDs.
Right.
And so combine that with John Deere and the voting machine vendors and medical implant people, and there's an almost unimaginably vast constituency for perverting technology to control you. And so this is where Lessig's theory comes in. When you run up against the limits of what you can do, say, politically, because mostly our legislatures are not very good on this stuff, we have axes of freedom on other dimensions. So maybe we use norms to try and open a political space. And a good example of that would be the fight over the European Union's copyright directive, where right now there's this bonkers proposal to require all platforms that allow for public discourse, anywhere where someone might post something that might be copyrighted, including the server that sent this podcast to the person listening to it, right? Every one of those will have to operate a filter. That filter will have to have a kind of wide open database that anyone can throw anything into and say, this is my copyright, don't allow it to appear on the internet. There'll be no checks and balances for that database and no penalties for putting things in it that you should know or that you do know are not your copyright. It will cost hundreds of millions of euros per company to implement this. So it'll snuff out all the small European companies and just leave the 5 American big tech companies in their wake. And it will allow for both inadvertent and deliberate censorship on a scale that's hard to imagine. And so where we were unable to merely get a political outcome, because the politician who's backing this is a German MEP called Axel Voss, and he's beholden to a small industrial group, and that's why he's backing it. We were able instead to make mass campaigns. We got 4 million internet users in Europe to write to their parliamentarians, and not just generically write to their parliamentarians, but write to their parliamentarians and remind them that there are EU elections in May. So for the most part, they may not care about this kind of petition, but in the run up to May, they do. And we also made a point of pointing out that the European Union has spent a lot of time saying that people should engage more with its policies, and that Brexit is what happens when people lose faith in the European Union. And we have been able to make that part of the discourse, that the European Union can't afford to turn its back on 4 million people, not because of the election necessarily, but because the credibility of the institution requires that it be visibly responsive to popular will. And so, we're able to use normative arguments to affect political change that we would have otherwise not been able to affect through, say, business models, because there just aren't companies big enough to resist this. It turned out this morning, as we record this, there was a leak from Facebook that showed that Facebook was quietly lobbying the European Commission in favor of this, basically on the grounds that it can afford it and none of its competitors can.
Wow.
And so we can't rely on big tech to save us from big content. Big tech and big content are just, it's like but more Orwell. You look at the last scene of Animal Farm, you look from the pigs to the farmers and the farmers to the pigs, and you can't tell the difference. When big tech and big content sit down to make a meal of Europe, it doesn't matter who gets the bigger piece. And so this has been a normative success.
I've done quite an intellectual setup on this topic. We touched on some philosophical issues, but I realised during the break I'm more interested in knowing whether or not anyone at Amazon can listen into what goes on in my bedroom. I'm not suggesting that they'd be particularly exciting results of eavesdropping, but that would bother me. So if it can hear me say, if it's listening in a way enough to know when I've said turn on the light, how do I know that there's not somebody nefarious or naughty tuning in when I'm turning on something else? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. John's in Reading. John, quickly, clean my mind. John, talk.
Right, I'm about to do a student's inquiry on you.
Carry on.
Right, so
yes.
For example, I'm using the American example on the political system. We don't have in the moment in Britain, but it could be a possibility if this comes through. So, say, for instance, you had something listened to you in your bedroom and you say, I don't like Jeremy Corbyn or I don't like Theresa May. And what you essentially have, you have large amounts of data which you can send political parties if the law got changed. Now,
so you're doing the clever thing when you're saying, yeah, look, as things stand, this technology shouldn't worry you, but if things change, the technology will be in your bedroom and it'll be too late.
So say, for example, I'm trying to say this because there's loads. So, for example, say, for instance, where I am in Reading, we decided to we find out basically that a chunk of Reading always votes Labour or votes Conservative. What potentially the parties could do in power is they could cut. You have basically like constituencies.
But you do sound a bit mad. You know that, don't you?
No, I'm not saying that. It's completely honest. So, for example, I've done canvassing in the past, and basically, one of the laws stands is that I can't know what your data is. We can only go off what you've told us on the front door. You say you vote Labour, you vote Lib Dems, you vote Conservative.
Yeah.
Now, say, for instance, you have a political party, I'm not going to say who suddenly decides to fund a mass amount of money into social media or areas to basically get data. That sort of organisation.
Yeah.
Basically takes users Facebook, for example. Then what you could do is you could fund that information to political party. You could then
but if ifs and buts were pots and pans, there'd be no need of tinkers, would there? So
that is Brexit. You've had a situation where the large amounts of data has been used in a way, and if you can't say to me that same data can't be used, it's happening right now, basically in the way the constituencies are being changed. You don't think it's not being changed in the way, basically, how people vote. People always live in places for houses.
But
50
you're talking
years.
too quickly. I mean, it might be my ears, because I felt this with the King of England as well. So maybe my ears need a bit of an upgrade. But I'm an old man, John. Let me just deal with this one step at a time, all right?
Okay.
So
sorry, mate. You said speed up. I didn't. No,
I didn't. So the
algorithms
algorithms on Facebook identify people who look a bit racist and then bombard them with Brexit propaganda. That's, in your view, that's how it got over the line.
Firsthand.
Yeah, we've all seen it firsthand. Everybody who was bombarded with propaganda denied that it had any influence whatsoever on their vote. So that's why it's still moot in a way.
Which they can say, of course.
So if what you're suggesting in a possible future, if I spend my life wanging on at home about how much I hate Pakistanis and Romanians and Poles, then a similar thing could happen, except that they would have much more than just my Facebook page. They'd have my name and address, and they could come round to my house.
So what you do at the moment is you have, a lot of people don't realise it, but it happens at the moment. When people knock on your front door, and they're from Labour and the Conservatives, they take in every single piece of information. I've done canvassing. I've done the exact same thing. They say, I don't like this person, but I really like this person. Do you always vote? I always vote this way. So you get it written on a piece of paper. That's the old-fashioned way. It's always been like that for hundreds of years. You basically get your information taken, you vote a certain way, and on a certain day, people will knock on your houses to say, have you voted yet? In this instance, which is very scary and very dangerous, a lot of people should realise how dangerous this is. The information is getting funneled via the internet, via data, to these political parties who know exactly how you vote and how which way. So what they do, they'll target lots of monies in your area, or they'll cut up constituencies on how they don't like to be voted, and they can win mass elections.
But there's nothing we can do about it, mate, because it's really cool to be able to turn your lights on without getting out of bed. I'm not being reductivist. I mean, it just is cool.
No, there is.
Also, nobody thinks they're susceptible to propaganda. This is one of the great lessons of 2018, isn't it? As all of the evidence of law breaking came out, and algorithm manipulation, and appalling abuses of the electoral law, and everybody was queuing up to say, so what if they did do it? I didn't vote Brexit because of that. I voted Brexit because of fish and blue passports.
No, mate, I've seen it personally first time.
I know you have, but they deny it. The person you've seen it on, they would not say to you, John, I did a boo-boo because of my Facebook. They will still claim it's all about sovereignty.
I've had mates, basically, I've known him since I was 16 years old, and he's such a dear bloke, and he's the nicest bloke in the world.
Yes.
And then he'll send me a photo, and he's like, you haven't seen this, but yeah, look at this. Look at all these immigrants that are like attacking these women in, like, Sweden or something.
Yeah.
And I'm like, mate, what the hell are you on? You look at it, and you go by details, and mate, this isn't real. I went, forget it.
Doesn't matter, does it?
And they'll get a constant barrage of fake media.
Yes, but we're not arguing with each other. He doesn't feel that he is being manipulated. In fact, you give me an opportunity to share an astonishing story from Sweden, which involved, I think, an Afghan asylum seeker accused of assaulting a 17-year-old girl, and the police have tracked it via Facebook into how it became a claim that an 11-year-old had been gang raped. It was the same. So they've traced the story to source. And do you know what they did, John? They went and knocked on the doors of the people who played a part in the Chinese whispers process, and all but one of them then removed what they'd posted after the police had explained to them that it wasn't true.
Because it's a game to them, mate.
Well, of course it's a game to them with big results, but what's the solution then?
The solution is that we need to take new data and especially have the government take this a lot more seriously than what it is, and specifically stop allowing any political party to use data, and especially stop.
Yeah, well, we can do that though, but do we get rid of the speakers?
I have a massive issue with Labour Party and the Conservative Party using the internet and data.
Yeah, I do as well, but we're getting off the message here. Would I still be able to turn my lights on from bed?
So I think we're in two little worlds.
No, I'm not though, because nothing you've said is disputable by me, either because I don't disagree with it or I lack the knowledge to dispute it. I take everything you've said as read, but the appeal is human. It's like remote control, you know, or you know, when it turned out that some technological developments were probably bad for us and we all carried on doing it anyway. I'm just really intrigued by this. And can I not put it into law that political parties are not allowed to access any data that is culled from these devices? To which you respond by saying, yeah, that's one law in one country at one period of time. What about another country? What about another period of time? What about another law? And then I should get scared, but I don't, and I don't understand why. Jason's in Pimlico. Jason, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello,
Good
Jason.
now afternoon, yeah.
Yes.
Epsidicism, word of the week a couple of weeks ago. Still a blinder.
What is?
Epsidicism.
Remind me what that was again.
It was your word of the... Well, it was my word of the week.
No, epsidicism. What does it... I've forgotten what it means. I think I got it off Susie Dent. We're digressing and the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking.
You're touching a lot of different areas. I used to live in Sweden, so yeah, I'm not surprised by some of that.
Yes.
James, can I just actually start by thanking you for something you did yesterday?
We are going to run out of time, but yeah, of course you can.
Which was, well, not fessing up, but just apologising for what a lot of your industry has been doing.
Yes.
And that's a bigger subject we'd like to talk to you on another level.
Well,
right, 2008, in a pub with my best mate, got talking to a guy that worked for a very large world brand of mobile phone at the time, who worked in the kind of deep tech department, who then told us all about how the devices, well, just it was the first version of smartphones, and how they had the capability of being able to record anything at any time, as long as the battery's in.
Yeah.
That then followed a few years later, 2011, with a girl I was seeing almost breaking up with me because she received an 11-minute phone call, voicemail on her mobile, which was a recording of us talking in bed.
And do you know how that happened?
Nope. That's subsequently happened 2 more times using different devices.
And you think this is some sort of snafu in the technology?
No, the point I'm making is that we are being listened to all the time at some point somehow. And I think keywords. The one thing is keywords. The one on the home phone was a conversation I'd had with somebody, and I'd been telling them about this situation, what I thought. And he then went into a diatribe of keywords that related to things that were happening kind of globally at the time. And then literally within a few days, I got a recording of the conversation I was having with a friend. She was on a mobile, I was on my landline.
You're confusing me a bit, and I'm late for the news. That's the only reason I'm moving on, because there are surveillances in place that operate on keywords in the context of national security, which is why the more cryptic you are, the harder it is for me to understand whether we're looking at that or whether we're looking at this. But you make a brilliant point that I think is the point at which we should all be chilled, not in a good way, chilled to the core. They are potentially listening to us all the time. All the time. Potentially. Aren't they? I don't know. I think so. And I'm still not frightened. I must be mad. Here's a sentence. Smith has said he hopes the voice-activated Echo, which answers users' questions, plays music, reads news, and connects to other smart devices, will provide information on how a man came to be found dead in 31-year-old Bates's hot tub. This is an astonishing story of a defendant in a murder trial, potentially, a murder case, agreeing to the handing over of recordings from his smart speaker device. But it won't be recordings that he didn't know were taking place, will it? It will just be recordings of what he has said to the Echo in this case. Problem is, once you start thinking about it, it's very hard to shake the sense of being listened to all the time, because there's I mean, you can talk about keywords. Jason in Pimlico just before the break is absolutely right that what happens is it hears a word, in this case its own name. You say, Andy, please turn on the lights. But it's listening all the time in case that word pops up. It's not listening in a human sense, but it's listening in a sense. Ivan is nodding furiously, so I'm clearly kicking it out of the park today. And I still don't feel frightened by this, and I don't understand why. Jacob's in Bristol. Jacob, what can you tell us?
Oh, hello.
Hello, Jacob.
Hiya. Big fan, James, recently. I've started listening to your show about 2 months ago, and I haven't stopped. It's always been on the radio.
Thank you, mate. I appreciate that.
Oh, thanks. Just going back to a few years ago, when Google did the deep learning thing and they won that game of Go. Do you remember that?
We're going to have to sort your phone line out, Jacob. I don't know what you've done since you spoke to the producer, but we will get you back, because I'm told that you really know what you're talking about. John's in Crawley. John, what did you want to say?
How you doing, James?
I'm all right.
Good. So the Echo, for example, or
yes.
Andy, as you're calling it.
Yes.
I found a fantastic post on Reddit a couple of years ago explaining exactly how it works from an Amazon engineer. So essentially it's got like 2 modes. You've got one little firmware chip which
yes.
just listens for a wake word.
Yes.
And then you've got the actual processor that sits in the device.
So the processor doesn't wake up until the firmware chip has been activated by the wake word.
That's exactly right. So it listens
But then I'm
word.
Relaxed.
Yeah, so it listens for the wake word, and then what it actually does inside, it actually powers up all of the internals. So it's not doing anything until it hears that wake word. Okay? So it's only after that wake word does it go off and contact the Amazon servers and does all the language processing.
So it could be used in some of the ways that people have been spooked by, but only if you're actually asking the device for information about X, Y, or Z.
Exactly
in the case of politics, it would be no different from your Facebook page. Demonstrate. So is there, and technologically, is there any way I can override it from the other end and listen into you without you having said the wake word? Don't know.
No, I don't think it's possible.
No, well, I don't think it's possible either, but it's frightening.
I mean,
this is how. Do you never watch James Bond films?
Secretly, constantly listening.
This is how they take over.
Networking, main wake chip, blue LED ring, and everything only work when the wake word is activated.
Yeah, same. Yeah, I get that. I don't know enough. I don't think you do either. Although you probably know more than I do. I know a lot about espionage novels and dystopian fiction and James Bond. And this kind of technology is a dream. It's pure Bond villain potential.
Oh, yeah, I agree with you.
John in Crawley, I think you'll find that at 10:10 last night, you were doing something very, very odd with your shredded wheat. How on earth do you know that? Well, I was listening, John.
Yes.
Step away from the shredded wheat, John.
We do have, European data protection regulations to help us, so maybe Amazon are doing something right. We'll see.
He's done it. European data, yeah. Oh, well played. Oh, my days. 40 is the time. Thank you, John. Back to Jacob in Bristol. Jacob, where were we?
Hello.
Hello.
The Google, I forgot what it was called, deep learning Go algorithm that beat that person in the game of Go.
Yes.
Nobody knew how that worked. Not even Google. Google don't know how that algorithm beat that game of Go. So my point is, so you know what? I've completely forgotten my point.
Don't worry, it happens. I think. Can I have a crack at telling you what it is? That's me in a nutshell, isn't it, Jacob? Let me tell you.
I think you're less nervous about being on the radio.
No, exactly that. So, for people who aren't clear on what this is, Go is a Chinese game, I think, isn't it, or an Oriental game? But the point is, it's quite complicated. So it's a bit like Big Blue, the IBM computer that beat grandmasters at chess. But Go, I think, the algorithm learnt from playing. So it learned from moves that other people made, but they lost track, if I've understood you correctly, at some point of how the algorithm ended up being better than anybody it had ever played. It was like an accumulative process, culminating in Google having effectively created something it couldn't explain. And that is, you, I think, probably rang in to tell us the same thing could happen here, and that should give us cause for concern.
Yes, kind of, except, it came back and went. Do you remember the few...
We've lost the Jacob, my friend. We've lost the phone, and I promise you, next time you ring in, we will move heaven and earth to keep the lines of communication clearer and more open. And there is no shame in being nervous. It's better to be nervous than to be, I would suggest, full of misplaced confidence. Of course, it means that you won't be going viral. John is in Stourbridge. John, where were we?
Well, I think we will be listened to.
Well, of course we are. We're on the radio, you fool. I've got over 1 million listeners.
You hope we've been listened to.
Yes. Be a bit of a problem if we weren't. My kids need shoes.
Well, that's true. We had an incident at home. My sister-in-law was bought a puppy, which sadly died a couple of days later.
A puppy, not a poppy. A puppy.
A puppy, not a poppy.
Yes, carry on.
And my other half was having a telephone conversation with her sister about this incident. I wasn't involved in the conversation at all, but I was in the room.
Yeah.
And a day or two later, pet insurance adverts started coming up on my Facebook feed.
Yeah.
That's got to be odd.
Oh, don't. Come on.
I promise you.
No, but it doesn't mean they were listening to your phone calls.
I'm not convinced.
Did you put anything on Facebook by way of commiseration for your sister-in-law's dead dog?
No. I'm heartless.
Did they put anything involving you on Facebook that had... So you've done something? Do you own a pet?
None.
None at all?
None at all. No. That's what makes it very interesting, I think.
It's not, though. It's no... Have you got a colander on your head at the moment?
I don't even own a tinfoil hat.
Because it can't... But they're not listening to... What would be the point of listening to our phone calls to flog us pet insurance? If they were trying to sign you up for the Third World War or something like that, then I'd get it. But they're not going to be breaching all manner of privacy laws, endangering their own commercial future for the chance of flogging you some dog insurance. They're just not, John, are they?
Well, possibly.
No, they're not.
I think one of the problems...
It's a coincidence. It's a coincidence. If the pet insurance had popped up on your feed and your sister-in-law's puppy hadn't just died, you would not have even batted an eyelid.
That is very true.
I know. So it's a coincidence. So it's a bit like this is it, isn't it? We think it's like fate or something when it's actually just a coincidence. It's a confluence of circumstances. I think
it could definitely be a case of putting two and two together and.
Because we're all going to have examples like that. I think we are, although you've given me pause. Should we squeeze in Matt in Reading? I think we have to, apparently. Matt, what can you tell us?
So, how are you doing, James?
I'm pretty good. What have you got?
So basically, you're sort of looking at it from the wrong angle.
Almost certainly.
The first thing I'd say is, can Amazon remotely activate your wake chip through software updates? 100% they can, without a shadow of a doubt. However, do they really want to? I mean, the mass mining of people's data is a real issue at the moment, and it's becoming a commercial entity. But from your fear aspect of it, you should be more concerned of somebody who's in the public light. Can they listen to you in the bedroom? Well, more to the point, they can sit outside your house, because you're never going to crack into Amazon's servers. They're the most secure on the planet. But can I sit outside your house and crack into your Wi-Fi network? Yes, I can. And your Alexa, or whichever device
Don't say that, Andy.
is connected to your Wi-Fi network. So once I'm into your Wi-Fi network, I can then scan for devices connected to your network, your laptop, your phones, whatever it is. Can I then override the software and activate an app which is listening to you? 100%. If you really wanted to. That's why.
What do you do? What's your field of expertise?
So I'm a penetration tester, so it's actually my job to hack into computer networks to identify and expose issues that may become a problem within banks and defence companies.
So actually it's about people hijacking the technology. It's not about the people providing the technology. Why shouldn't I be a little bit... Sorry, I mean, you're clearly much, much more knowledgeable than I am about this, and I'm already out of time, but why shouldn't I be fearful of the people providing the technology if the technology can be hijacked? Does that make sense?
It kind of does, because you've got to ask the question to why do they want to listen to you? I mean, how many billions of these have Amazon sold? You specifically as James, why do they want to listen to you?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. There's an arrogance involved in it, isn't there? I remember thinking that. Someone once said that they wouldn't use an Oyster card because they didn't want the government to know how they were travelling around. And I thought, why would the government be interested in you, you grubby little...
But then on the other side, the interesting comment the famous guy from the CIA made, who's been in a couple of films, saying you don't care about your privacy because you've got nothing to hide.
Yeah.
It's like saying you don't care about freedom of speech because you've got nothing to say at that particular moment.
That's a great line. So what are you're obviously much more fearful of rogue operators targeting individuals.
Only because we have contests in our office. I can't go into too many details, but one of the contests we had was with one of these home automation devices that wasn't a Google or Amazon one, of who could get into it the quickest.
And go on, who won?
I didn't win, but I was 72 seconds.
To get into a smart speaker?
Yeah, and there was also quite a funny aspect of the guy's parrot who was repeating things that he said and then caught his house on fire because when he went to work, he turned the toaster on.
That's a kosher story, is it?
Well, according to what I read on the internet, it was. I obviously didn't see it with my own eyes.
No, I know. But I meant not just an anecdote, because it rings a vague bell with me.
Yeah.
What did you... Do you not need to know the Wi-Fi password in the house to get into that device in 72 seconds?
Yeah, but, I mean, as long as if you're on WEP, you've had it, you can get into WEP encryption within seconds or minutes.
Yeah.
If you've got WPA2, which most people do, you have to sit outside your house and then wait for someone to walk in and the device to connect, and you capture what's called a handshake, which is the
automatic logging in process, which involves the password, and you can then copy and paste it in. I'm using don't laugh at me for saying copy and paste. Don't laugh at me for saying copy and paste. But you kind of copy and paste it.
Yeah, it takes a while to decrypt the hash file.
Keep Matt's number. Keep Matt's number.
Yeah, it's quite easy to do.
What do you do in your house then? How have you protected yourself? Quickly, because Theo's got to talk to us about PMQs.
I have nothing in there. I don't even have a smart TV.
Because you're fearful of this?
Because of the nature of the work that I do, if I'm sat in my living room having a conversation with somebody, I could be construed as a target by someone because of the information I know, the same way that you could be construed as a target because you're in the public eye if someone dislikes you.
Oh, Lord.
That's why I would at least put it in your living room or something. I'd take it out of your bedroom, mate, if I'm honest.
What are you suggesting I get up to in my living room?
Well, whatever floats your boat.
12:49. We've got to go to ads. This is one of those calls that could have carried on for 3 hours, isn't it? And finally, Switzerland being the first to recognise the reality of a potential no-deal Brexit. It's just been announced that they will allow 3,500 work permits for Britain in case of a no-deal Brexit. That would add up to about 2,100 residence permits and another 1,400 short-stay permits allowed. As things stand, of course, we currently, as signatories to the agreement of free movement of persons between Switzerland and Britain, that would run out on March the 30th. So there you go. That's what the end of free movement looks like. They count us in, and then they count us out again. I don't care, James. I don't want to go to Switzerland. Here's Theo Usherwood.
Can I ask a question off the back of that?
No.
Sorry.
Carry on.
Okay. Bertie Ahern, the Irish T-shirt between 1997 and 2008.
Only because we've got to go so much to get through, and it's 12:54 already.
Okay.
It's your slot, mate.
Okay. Has been in front of MPs at the Brexit Select Committee this morning. He did, of course, play a major role in the Good Friday Agreement. Today, he was making the case that Ireland was not to blame for the backstop and the deadlock in which the UK now finds itself.
We will be part of that Europe, but it's not going to be, I believe, in any way to the detriment of our relationship with the UK, and we just have to find ways that we can keep that as strong as it has been, particularly in the last 45 years, and more particularly in the last 22 since the Good Friday Agreement. I mean, that's in our interest to do, and I think any future, and this government are trying to do that. I think any future Irish government will do that as well. There is nobody in Ireland celebrating the fact, and I deeply regret it. I mean, I was horrified the night of the vote, but, you know, it wasn't the first vote I lost in my life, or first vote that I saw going the opposite way, but that's the way the world is. And now you just have to do your best to make sure that the damage limitation is not too bad.
Now, before Jeremy Corbyn stood up at Prime Minister's questions, Theresa May was asked by one of her own MPs, Helen Whately, about whether the government was going to impose further restrictions on female genital mutilation. This, of course, comes off the back of Conservative MP Christopher Chope blocking a private member's bill, which would have made it much easier for the authorities to protect girls from FGM. Mrs May said the government would use its own time in Parliament to bring forward new law.
My honourable friend is absolutely right to raise the issue of this abhorrent practice, to recognise the importance of that first prosecution that took place on female genital mutilation here in the UK. It's only right that we find time for this bill, and the government will provide time to deliver it. We've strengthened the law on FGM, leading to that first conviction. We're helping communities around the world to end this appalling crime. But it is important that we give time to this bill and act further to ensure that we end what is an absolutely abhorrent crime that scars young girls for the rest of their lives, both physically and mentally.
Jeremy Corbyn doesn't usually stick with one topic, or he picks various angles around one topic. Today he decided to dump that strategy, focusing on the failures of the Transport Secretary Chris Grayling. The reason, of course, is this: on Monday the government announced it was cancelling a £14 million contract with Seabourn Freight to operate a ferry service from Ramsgate to Ostend in the event of a no-deal Brexit. That was despite receiving advice from consultants to the tune of £800,000 that it would be a bad idea to hand a contract to a company to run a ferry service if that company didn't in fact own any ferries.
Mr. Speaker, the Transport Secretary told the House that this decision to award a contract to Seabourn Freight had no cost to the taxpayer. This week, the National Audit Office found that £800,000 had been spent on external consultants to assess the bid. Will the Prime Minister use this opportunity to correct the record?
Theresa May's response was that £800,000 would have been spent anyway.
I have to say to the right honourable gentleman, he's a bit late to the party on this, because I was asked this question yesterday in the statement, I think, from the SNP benches. So Labour following the SNP. Well, whatever next. Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that, of course, as I just said, when these contracts were all let, proper due diligence was carried out. That included third-party assessment of the companies that were bidding for the contracts. There would have been a cost attached to this process regardless of who the contracts were entered into with.
Yeah, but if you'd entered into them with a shipping company that had some ships, the likelihood of that £800,000 being weed up a wall would have been diminished accordingly.
The problem is that Deloitte, who was named by the Prime Minister in the Commons, carried out due diligence on seaborne freight, but they were unable to carry it out to the full extent because seaborne freight was such a new company. It had only just
She cited
existed.
Deloitte in the House as one of the companies that had carried out the due diligence. If you go to Figure 6, Technical, Financial and Commercial Advice on the bids from the advisory firm Deloitte, you will read that the standard tests could not be completed on seaborne given a lack of existing financial information due to it only being incorporated in April 2017. Deloitte, therefore, did not make a formal assessment of seaborne's financial stability.
Yes. For Jeremy Corbyn, it was like punching a bruise at PMQs today. He just carried on, same strategy, focusing on Chris Grayling and forcing the Prime Minister to defend Chris Grayling when Chris Grayling doesn't even
Sheila, can we hear the defence of Chris Grayling just for comedy value? Or because we're eating into your time a bit now. Let's hear someone defend Chris Grayling.
It appears that we have to be fair to those advisors because they were instructed to restrict their due diligence to the face value of the presentation put to them by Seaborne Freight, a company that had no trading history, and look into the directors of Seaborne, some of whom it appears would not have passed a due diligence test. However, the Transport Secretary told the House...
We've lost the clip of Chris Grayling being defended, which it seems to me to be Pete Grayling. Here's Sheila Fogarty.
Right, it really does. Thank you very much indeed. I do find it. I'll play it at any point during my own programme.